Hello everybody and welcome to Flock Talk. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can administer medications to your bird without having to restrain them even if you haven't trained them yet. So Newt is having to take some antibiotics right now. He is not critically sick, he's just been sneezing a little bit more than usual, so we took him to the vet and there's nothing inherently wrong that we can see, but the sneezing is peculiar and there's nothing environmental that seems to be triggering it, so we're running a course of antibiotics just to be safe. Now, in most circumstances, I would have pre-trained my animal to be able to take medications from a syringe, no problem. However, I didn't get to that with Newt yet, so we are now having a medication that he doesn't like the taste of, and I have to administer that to him twice a day. Now, the standard way to do this would be to just restrain him and stick the food in his mouth and hold him there until he swallows it. However, that's quite stressful, and that's going to cause a lot of problems when every single time that you're grabbing your bird, it's a stressful, unpleasant situation. You're going to have to chase them around the room, you're going to end up getting bit, it's going to get nastier and nastier every single day until the medication doses are done, and then you're going to have to spend weeks to maybe even months repairing your relationship with your bird that just got completely trashed because of medication. So here is a way that you can potentially be able to give your bird meds that do not taste good if you weren't able to prepare beforehand. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is prepare a bunch of different foods that could be fed through a syringe. We're going to be trying to mix our medication with a food that the bird's gonna like. So I'm gonna work with a few different foods. The first one I'm working with here is peanut butter. Now, which food you use is going to be entirely up to you and your bird. I'm going to demonstrate a few different options here from stuff I just had laying around the house, but you will use whatever food you think your bird likes that could potentially cover up the taste of the medication. So what I'm starting with here is a simple jar of peanut butter with no additives or anything. It's just crushed up peanuts. And what I'm doing is I'm taking a scoop of that peanut butter that has separated from the oil, and I'm going to spoon some of that oil onto it and mix it until it has created the consistency that is going to flow nicely through a syringe. Whatever consistency you choose is going to depend on what your bird actually takes to. Some birds will not take liquids out of a syringe right out the gate. You will have better luck with something that's more the consistency of mashed potatoes. So keep that in mind with when you're mixing it. Maybe start out with it thicker and see if they're willing to take that, and then work down to it being thinner. It is easier to administer the medication if you're able to have your bird take a thin fluid. But if that's not going to work, it can be done. It just takes a lot more steps if the mixture is thicker. The next thing I'm trying is soaking pellets. Now this is whatever pellet my bird found best. You're just going to soak it in some warm water and leave it for a bit until the pellets expand and become quite mushy. And then you're just going to crush them with the back end of your spoon until it forms a paste. This third one, I'm going to be using frozen berries I had from my freezer. I'm simply going to microwave a bunch of them until they turn to mush and start producing some liquid at the bottom. And I'm going to try and make fruit juice, a sort of fruit puree. I'm going to mash them up with the back end of my spoon and then put them into a sifter and just crush them through the sieve because I use strawberries and I don't want the seeds to get stuck in my syringe. I just want the liquid that's going to come with those. Newt is a big fan of juice, so I'm optimistic this one might be a hit. And then the last one I have is going to be some Harrison's Recovery, which is basically a food for birds that are sick that's really, really concentrated, and it's also a hand-feeding formula. The key thing I'm doing with these is I'm making them all warm. That is something you will have to discuss with your vet. Not all medications can be mixed with warmth and heat. When you're asking whether or not their medication can be mixed with food, double check and see if it can be mixed with warmth as well, because parrots will tend to take warm fluids out of a syringe a lot easier than they will cold fluids, because it just reminds them of being regurgitated to by either a parent or a mate, and they're a lot more willing to take that temperature into their body than they will something that's cooler. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is get Newt to sample the bowls that we've made. So I want to find out which one he likes by default. He seems to like the fruit juice pretty well. Because if he doesn't like this food by default, then he's not going to like it when I've hidden medication in it. So I'm just going to hand him one by one and kind of see. He seemed to really like the fruit juice. He went straight to it and started eating a ton. This is the pellet mixture, And he's eating a little bit, but he's a little slower. He's not quite as enthusiastic. So if I were to hide something gross in here, I don't think that he would eat it. And he's even kind of hesitant to go in for more. So that one's probably not going to be the one. Next here we have the baby food, which I have on the spoon, which he, okay, took a huge mouthful. So he clearly very much loves the hand feeding formula. That is even better than the fruit juice, I would say. And then last, I will offer him the peanut butter, which he is completely ignoring and wanting nothing to do with. So the peanut butter is going to be a no-go. He's trying to get to the baby food jar again. So the baby food, or the hand-feeding formula, seems to be the biggest hit of the bunch. Oh, we're going to eat the fruit juice instead? No, still wants the baby food instead. So the baby food's what I'm going to opt to fill my syringes with, since that is his favorite. So before I go and even bring the medication into this, I want to make sure that Newt is comfortable eating out of a syringe in the first place. So you can see I have 3 different syringes here. One of them has the red line on it to tell me how much of a dose to give him. That one is going to stay my medication syringe. The other 2 are just going to be for plain food. So because I want to make sure that Newt is comfortable being able to eat out of a syringe, if your bird has never been near a syringe before, if the first thing they do is have it mixed with meds and it's kind of gross, it's going to put them off the experience right away. So what I'm going to do is, I'm trying to find Newt here, is I'm just going to fill a syringe with plain food. The tip is completely coated, so he can come over and he can just nibble the tips of this and eat the food off the end without having to really have the food be ejected from the syringe yet. This way your bird is getting familiar with the look of the syringe. They're not going to be scared of it. You could even set it down if you wanted to. And they can just eat the food off the end. It's still tasty, still delicious, but they're just licking it off the end. Once they're showing a lot of confidence and comfort with it, like Newt is, when he next grabs it, I am going to dispense a little bit into his actual mouth. And that's going to be a very strange experience for your bird for the first time. There's a lot of crumbs all over Newt's trying to get. It's going to be a very strange experience for your bird for the first time. Noodle. So they might actually spit it out the first time that you put food in their mouth, because it's weird to have something suddenly shot into your mouth when you're not expecting it. So your bird might spit it out, but if you make it kind of thicker, like this is almost a paste, they will be able to nibble it and you don't have to worry quite as much about the liquid pouring out and going down their face or anything. This way I can actually hold the syringe this way and be able to put a bunch of food out, and you can see it kind of hangs off the end and he can eat it. And this way your bird's going to get a lot of comfort and familiarity with the syringe, and it's not going to be tasting bad the first time they experience it. We're at a point where you can kind of have the syringe and the bird wants to follow it. They want to come get it. The food on it's delicious. That's when I would consider moving on to adding medication in. So for the medication, we've got a bit of a system that I'm going to use here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have 2 syringes that are going to be full of plain food, and then 1 that is full of medication. And the order that it's going to go in is we're going to have them gobble up the first syringe full of food. That way they're not expecting the meds. It's going to be nice and delicious. They're not going to be worried about anything. Then we're going to have a mix of both food and medication. So that way the flavor of the meds is kind of washed down a little bit, and they are so excited by the food that they just ate out of this syringe that they're basically going to swallow this without really thinking. You want this mixture to be a little bit thinner. If both can be the same kind of thin consistency and your bird can swallow it, then that's fantastic. Because that way what's going to happen is if it's really thick and your bird realizes it tastes like meds, you might only get a portion of the syringe into their mouth before they realize it tastes gross, and then they'll flick the rest out. And that's not ideal. Your bird's going to be missing half of their dose of medication. So you want to make both of these able to be a semi-fluid mixture, not quite as thick as the paste I'm working with right now. And once we've put the medication dose in his mouth, we are going to immediately have our second syringe ready, filled with just plain food again. Now your bird might not take this syringe depending on how gross the medication mixture was. Your bird might opt to ignore this, and that's okay if they do. What I would make sure you have on hand is just a handful of really high value seeds. That way the bird can have another reward for eating the gross food, but they don't have to go near the syringe that they might be scared of. I'd give it a couple minutes, wait for them to kind of settle down and enjoy their seeds, then maybe try this again. You just want to make sure that you are able to end with them having food out of a syringe again, so that way the last memory they don't have of the syringe is it tasting gross. You want to end with them thinking it was delicious, fantastic food, and there were lots of treats involved. If you were to feed them the medication and then just a bunch of treats, they're going to remember that the syringe tasted absolutely disgusting, and then they are going to be more hesitant to take the food from it again. Okay, so I have thinned this down a little bit so it's a bit runnier and it'll mix with the medication a bit better. You can't have it yet, hold on. And what I'm going to do now is take Newt's meds and set up that syringe first. We're going to take our clean medication syringe. I'm going to just suck up his dose. That's it. And then I will go in and I will suck up a bunch of the formula, or the hand feeding food. And there can be as much of this as I think he's going to eat. And then come back here. What I'm going to do, because right now all of the medication is up here and all of the food is up at the tip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cap the end, extend this out to get a little bit of air, and just shake it really vigorously. This way the meds are going to thin out and distribute themselves in with that hand feeding formula. And then it'll all be distributed nicely in there, and it'll help disguise the flavor a lot more instead of him just getting a straight shot. If you want, you can then kind of push the air out of the syringe, but it's not totally necessary. Just makes it a little bit easier on yourself later. You've got a bird butt in your face. I'm going to take the food syringe, just put a decent amount of food in there, and the second food syringe, also just sucking up plain food into there. Okay, so I've got my 3 syringes, food, medication, food. We are going to get Newt ready. I have got the, come back here. I've got the one with food in it. So you're going to pull him over, just the food. And I'm kind of trying to get it pretty quickly. Then we're going in with syringe number 2. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. Didn't taste good. So he said it tasted gross, so I'm going to add more food to it. Shake it up again. We're going to go for another clean one. Get the good taste in his mouth again. Delicious and tasty. Delicious and tasty. I'm going to coat the end of the medicine syringe with the food. Beautiful. And anytime I see him do that, where he kind of goes, oh, I didn't like that, I'm going to go back to the good syringe, the one that just tastes like good food. I'm so close to being done. There you go. Giving him lots of breaks to just have the good food. Delicious. I'm going to give him another syringe of just plain food because he's still a little bit hesitant with the way that he is taking it from me. He's really analyzing the flavor right now. You can see him twiddling it around in his mouth a lot more instead of just swallowing. And what I can even do is, because his dose is so small, this is the medication syringe, I can even top it up with more and dilute the medication even more if I need to. So then with the end of Newt's medication syringe here with the red line, whoop, I'm going to coat the tip of the syringe again in just the plain wet food, so he gets a nice tasty bite. That doesn't have any medication in it before the rest of it goes in his mouth. There you go. And he's still shaking his head a little bit and saying it doesn't taste fantastic, but you'll notice he's still chewing and he is still swallowing. The one thing you do want to watch out for when you're working with food that's kind of thick like mine is that you don't want to overfill the mouth. If you're working with a liquid, you can gently put it further back in the throat and kind of pour it down. But if you have, and it'll just kind of go down, being cautious not to get it in their respiratory system, of course. But when it's thick like this, you can't really do that. So ideally, you'd have your bird able to take a thinner fluid. And what's going to happen is if it tastes super, super gross and you've put too much in their mouth, they're just going to be able to shake their head and get it out. Versus if a really small amount is in their beak, it kind of gets stuck in there. And when they shake, it doesn't necessarily come out, and they'll move their tongue around to try and push it out, but it's a paste, so it'll just spread around their mouth, and they will usually end up swallowing just to get it gone. So if you're working with a thicker mixture, I would put a smaller amount of food in at a time to get them to swallow their meds, and if you're working with a liquid, I would kind of put as much in as you can so it'll just flow down, because if it's a liquid, as soon as they shake, the entire dose of medication is just going to go flying out of their mouth. What I would do on top of this as well is if every single time you pull out the syringes, one of them is going to taste bad, your bird may become averse to syringes as a whole. So what I would opt to do then is make sure that you are having some sessions outside of when they actually need their medication, just to offer your bird random snacks out of a syringe. In this way, a syringe coming out could mean just about any good random thing happening. It doesn't always have to mean that meds will inevitably be following one of them, and then they won't have to be quite as hesitant around syringes as a whole. Now that's how slow the process was with me having to use a thicker mixture. Because Newt hasn't been syringe trained, the thicker mixture is kind of necessary, because if you give him a straight liquid, he will just shake his head and spit it out right now because he hasn't been trained on how to take those things properly. If you are working with a thinner mixture, the bird will basically chug it back, whereas when you give them something thicker, they twiddle it around with their tongue and kind of texturize it in their mouth. When it's thin, they will just be swallowing and chugging. And that consistency is perfect because they will be so excited of getting the first mouthful of thin baby food or whatever you're using, that they will have chugged back the entire dose of medication before they've actually been able to notice that it has that medication taste. As they're just chugging without thinking, they're not twiddling it around in their mouth and tasting it and having the capacity to really be able to spit it out. When they're doing that chugging motion, the food is just getting flung down their digestive system and they are not really thinking. And then cleaning the syringes is really easy. You just take a bowl of cold water, not hot. If you use hot water, that black plunger in the middle can expand and then your syringe will stop working. So all you're going to do is take a clean bucket of cold water, suck up cold water in your syringe and blast it out into your sink. And just repeat that until the syringe is clean. If you have a very, very small bird, you will not be able to rinse out your medication syringe. So your syringe that has your meds in it will not be able to have food in it because you just can't leave that out and get it growing bacteria. And the reason for that is that every time that you push this out, some medication will actually stay in that very tip. And when it comes to microdosing really small birds, that tiny bit in the tip is basically an entire dose. So every time that you clean this out, you're throwing a dose away and then you're not going to have enough medication to actually last your bird their entire treatment. And that is it. It really can be that simple. As always, do make sure you speak with your vet team first. Not all medications can be mixed with food. Not all medications can be exposed to heat. So make sure that you are speaking with your vet team and seeing whether or not this is an option for the medication that your bird is having to use. And if it is, the answer might really be that simple, where all you have to do is mix it with something. You absolutely can get creative. I've only done 4 different things here to try and see what's going to work for Newt. There are a ton of different options for this. You can use baby food, you can use hand feeding formula, you can use juices, you could use homemade smoothies. There's a lot of different options as long as it's something that your bird likes and it's something that can easily be fed through a syringe hole without getting stuck. There's really no limit to what you can give them. Just always, always, always be sure to check with your veterinary team first just to make sure that nothing is going to mix with it. For example, like sugar water could potentially be an option. However, that can upset a parrot's stomach. So if they're already on a medication that is going to potentially upset their stomach, or they're on a medication for stomach issues, then mixing it with sugar is probably not the best idea, right? However, if you're on a medication that isn't already a stomach irritant and nothing else is working, and having a tiny bit of sugar dissolved in water seems like it might be an option to help relieve a lot of that stress, then it might not be the worst option to try. So there's always a lot of different things to consider. Make sure you're discussing everything with your veterinary team and not just making choices by yourself when it could have bad side effects with their meds. But that is it. That's the method I am going to be using for the next 2 weeks with Newt to hopefully keep some of the stress off of our medications. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this is able to take some stress off of you guys and your birds, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye! I let him just have free roam of the bird food bowl. He's got quite the messy face.